There's a couple of announcements that I missed I wanted to hit. I don't know how of life. And we're going to take a look, at one of Jesus's just plain old Jesus Day. Let's look in Matthew 14. We're going to read in verse 22 here in a second, but in Matthew 14, Jesus, he starts off his day. The first thing that happens in the chapter is his cousin John the Baptist is beheaded. And, he hears about that, and he's feeling some things, so he tries to go off to a place and pray by himself. He needs some alone time. He tries to go to a solitary place. But the people here, and so the people, they follow him. They try, they go looking for Jesus. Instead of when they found him turning them away, he decided, okay, well, all right, they're here, let me heal them. He just started healing the sick, Then, after he healed the sick, all right, they're hungry. There's 5,000, so he feeds 5,000. Just a regular old plain old Jesus Day. Then, we're going to pick it up in Matthew 14, verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat to go ahead of him on the other side while he dismissed the crowd. And I was wondering, I was like, immediately, it starts off immediately, Jesus made his disciples get in the boat. And then I was like, well, what was something immediate that made him have to get the disciples in the boat? Well, if we look at John 6, it explains why Jesus had to immediately get the disciples in the boat in the other parallel passage. In John 6, verse 14 and 15, after the people saw the miraculous signs that Jesus did, they began to say, surely this is a prophet who has come into the world. Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him a king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. So Jesus knew that they were getting ready to try to make him king by force. So, he knew that the motives of the people were not spiritual. If the disciples would have stayed, maybe they would have fallen into the crowd. They were already arguing over who's the greatest and all this stuff. And he's like, okay, wait a minute. They're wanting to take me by force. Hey, guys, you guys get in the boat. I'm going to go off and pray. So he sent them off into the boat. Let's look in let's go back to Matthew 14, verse 23. After he had dismissed him, he went up to the mountainside himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already considerably distant from the land, buffeted by the waves and because the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, which is about 3 to 6 a.m., he's still up. Went and prayed a little bit, and 3 in the morning, he decides to go for a walk. During the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid. Lord, if it is you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat and walked on water and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink and cried out, Lord, save me! Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You have little faith, he said. Why do you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. When those who were in the boat worshiped him by saying, truly, you are the Son of God. You look at this passage here, and, there's a storm. Jesus, he sends the disciples out. They were on land in a safe place, kind of, but then here comes this unruly crowd. All right, we're going to take Jesus by force. So then Jesus is like, okay, the safest place for these guys, put them in the boat. Storms, they roll up. You never know when a storm is coming sometimes. Especially in the Sea of Galilee. It's about 13 miles long and 8 miles wide, and it wasn't unusual for a violent storm to suddenly sweep across it. But Jesus, he knew the storm was coming. He could have prevented it because he did calm the waves. He could have prevented the storm from happening, but he allowed it to happen to teach his disciples a lesson. The disciples were in the middle of the storm that he sent them because they obeyed what he told them to do. He sent them out in the middle of the storm. They were safer in the storm in God's will than they would have been on land in the crowd's will. You know, we can never judge our security on the basis of circumstance alone, of the things that are going on around us. Jonah, on the other hand, you think about the storm that Jonah was in. He was in a storm because he was running from God. When you look at the different types of storms, there are storms of correction when you're living one way and God is doing something in your life to change it, to get you to do the right thing. And there are storms of perfection where God is trying to perfect you, where he's changing you and molding you and shaping you. We got to realize that just because you're in a storm doesn't mean that you did something wrong. And it doesn't really have to be a storm sometimes. We're going to take the first one we're going to take a look at is a storm of correction. Let's go to Jonah 1, verse 1 through 7. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed towards Tarsus. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarsus to flee from the Lord. When you're fleeing from the Lord, expect problems. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, such a violent storm that arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out in his own God. They threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah, all in sin and unaware, had gone down below deck, where he lay down and fell asleep. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God." And then, call on your God. At least he knew that he was worshiping the right one. Huh? Maybe he will take notice of us, and we will not perish. Then the sailors said to each other, "Come, let us cast lots and find out who's responsible for this calamity." They cast lots, and it fell on Jonah. Storms of corrections, you'll be found out. That's the storm when you're hiding sin, when you're doing something wrong and you think nobody sees. One day lots will be cast and be like, "Oh my goodness, it's him, it's her." God will publicly expose you when you're doing something that you know is against the scriptures and you continue to do it. One time when I was younger, I was seeking God. I was going after God, and I remember I went to this. They had this big old conference in the TWA Dome where the St. Louis Rams played, where they had every kind of Christian come. It was called Promise Keepers. So I went to this little Promise Keepers thing, and I was, and then I was up in like the nosebleed section, and they called everybody down who wants to say a prayer to rededicate yourself to the Lord. So I went down, and I prayed, and I was like, yeah. And then I remember one thing that the guy said when he was preaching. And all the, false doctrine, real doctrine, but there was some truth that he said. If you're in sin, if you're living in the wrong way, you're going to end up in the newspaper. And I was like, amen. I went, all right, I recommitted myself to the Lord. About 3 months later, I was in the newspaper. My house was raided for selling drugs, and I was in the newspaper. I tried to go to work, and they had my thing posted up there. "Oh, no, you're fired." It was posted at my job place. And I was like, whoa, oh, no, well, you're not fired. You just can't work until you clear this up. But, yeah, man, this is bad news. It was posted everywhere. And I went to jail, and I was sitting down, and it came on the news. And everybody was like, dang, that dude's in trouble. And then they looked over and it was like, dang, that's him. We'll be exposed when when you're hiding sin, running around telling everybody you're a Christian. Lying, then nobody will trust your word. Drinking and driving, then you'll get a DUI. Sex outside of marriage, STDs, kids out of wedlock. Not giving your contribution, then the Lord will put a curse on you. Maybe you'll get one of them speeding camera, thing. You don't want to give, I'll take it one way or another. Overeating, cholesterol, weight issues, high blood pressure. We've got to really look at the storms of correction that God puts in our life and allow them to correct us. The disciples, they weren't at this specific time, they weren't in a storm of correction. They were in a storm of perfection. They obeyed Jesus. Jesus said, go on the boat. So they went on out on the boat. When you're walking with God and you think things are going wrong, don't let a storm of perfection turn into a storm of correction by getting angry at the Lord. I'll go on that later. So this wasn't their first, and Jesus, he sent them out on the boat. He'd already trained them how to deal with the storm. And so this wasn't their first storm on the boat. So he's like, all right, let me send them out. Our point number 2 is take courage and don't be afraid when you're in a storm. Let's go to Matthew 8. Matthew 8, verse 23. Here's where Jesus was with them during the first storm. Matthew 8, 23. Then he got into the boat and wait a minute, let me run it back. This was another normal day of Jesus. He was out healing people. He was out counting the cost with people, telling them what it really took to live the life of a Christian. And then he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. Without warning, again, a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him up saying, Lord, save us! We're going to drown! He replied, oh, you of little faith, why are you so afraid? Then he got up, rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. Then they were amazed, asking, what kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him. This was the first time they were all on the storm together. Jesus was relaxing in the boat, just doing what Jesus does. I mean, he had a hard day's work. Now he's doing what he does. And the disciples, they see, a storm comes, they panic. Why don't you save us? What's going on? We're going to die. Is that how we get sometimes in the storms when we think we're about to die in something that's really not that bad? A storm of correction or perfection. In John 16, verse 33, it says, I have told you all these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Just because we become a Christian doesn't mean that we're going to be drama-free or trouble-free, issues-free. There's going to be issues, but we just need to make sure that we're not it. When we find ourselves in a storm because we obeyed the Lord, we got to remember that he got us to it, he can get us through it. We can't really get mad at the Lord because of the situation that we think we're in. He may have taken us to a better situation. I remember at the GLC one time, our brother Blaze Fumba was talking about he was on his way he was in Africa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, going to the airport, and everything was stopping him from getting on the plane. He was running late. He had a not tolls, but roadblocks. He got to the airport and was like, hey, you know what? I need to catch my plane. I need to catch my plane. And everything was stopping him from getting on the plane on the way there. Right as he was getting ready to go to the gate, it blew up. Sometimes God does things to protect you. He'd all stressed out. I got to get there. And all of a sudden, boom, Oh, thank you, Lord. Then you realize, wow, okay, amen. That's why. And so let's take another look at this passage in Mark 6:47. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land, talking about Jesus. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against him. About the fourth watch of the night, he went out walking to them on the lake, walking on the lake. He was about to pass them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost and cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, "Take courage. It is I. Do not be afraid." And I like to show that one because he's walking out on the lake and was about to just walk past. Jesus, man, he's funny, man. You know, they're out there straining. It says they're straining with the oars. Jesus! Somebody walking on the. He's about to walk past him and just check up on him or something. I already taught them how to do this. I'm here. I can save them. Let's see how they do. We got to remember that the storms are things that make us stronger. Sometimes we feel like that Jesus has deserted us in the middle of the storm. But he's not. If we're right with God and you're not living a double life and living in sin, he's right there to help you. He's right there to perfect you. He's also there to correct you when you're not. A quick story about storms and trees. In a windstorm, only the sturdiest trees remain standing. The harsher the wind, the stronger the tree must be to withstand it. Trees that survive the most adverse weather conditions have developed deep roots and strong trunks. How deep are your roots in the Bible? How strong are you standing in the kingdom? Strong winds kill weaker vegetation. A forest that has not been subjected to storms is much sturdier. A form that has been subjected to storms is much sturdier than woodlands in protected areas. The weaker trees have been removed, allowing more room for the stronger trees to thrive. A forest protected from adverse weather conditions becomes overcrowded with weak, thin trees, all competing for nutrients and sunlight. When this area is eventually exposed to a storm, virtually all the vegetation will be leveled. A forest consistently tested by adversity will grow and endure. The protected area, which is rarely exposed to challenging conditions, becomes weak with little longevity. You know, the storms that we see in our lives, they're there to make us stronger. We can't let them take us out. You ever see the storm with the palm trees? They're bending, but they're not breaking. They're just swaying in the wind. They almost double over, but they stand right up. That's how we need to be in the storms of life. When I was in sometimes we don't know what we can withstand. Right? When I was in the Army boot camp, there's one particular time we went out, and it was called advanced individual training. My job was an infantry soldier, just a grunt. We went out for 13 weeks, and we would go out and train it, but then at the very end, we would stay out for 2 weeks. It's called a bivouac. We would stay out for 2 weeks, and then we would do a lot of training drills. They would throw gas, fake gas on us, and we had to don our masks, and do all the training that we went through, we had to put it into practice. Then at the end, we would have to walk back 20 miles to our spot, within this time limit. I believe it was 10 hours or something like that. So keep in mind, you've been camping for 2 weeks. You know, they've been gassing us in the middle of the night, waking you up, doing all these things. Then it's time to go. We pack everything that we've had out there. We have all of our gear. We have our helmets, our rifles, our water, our rucksacks. The mortars, man, these things are heavy. I was struggling just standing there holding it. And we have to walk back with it for 20 miles. So as we're walking, we're all like, this is the last thing we have to do. And at the end, they have what you call a turning blue ceremony, which means that you're infantry soldier, you're blue. It's, amen. But sometimes you feel like you're turning blue. So we're marching back. As we start to march, we're all fired up. Yeah, it's getting ready. Woo, this is that. We got a few days left. We got our graduation in a couple days. But if you don't complete the march, you don't graduate. All right, so now it starts to rain. The rain comes down, and every time a car comes down the road, you have to hide in the woods. And then you come back out.
Wow.
And then it turns to mud. Now we're walking in the mud.
Wow.
And we left at like 4 in the afternoon, and we had to walk. We eventually got there at 2 in the morning. To her. That's a fast pace. Behind, they had a truck following for the people who were falling out, getting recycled. I pushed myself so hard that time. I was drinking some water. I hallucinated. I was drinking water, and I saw a snake wrap around my arm and felt it. And I did one of those, and everybody's like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "Nothing, nothing." But I got back out, and I pushed myself harder than I ever have in my life, and I've never had to do that again. But what it showed me is that I'm way more capable than what I think I can do. In these storms that God is bringing in our lives, we are way more capable to do the things that we think we can't do. We've got to be willing to weather the storm and not snap and break and fall out. And there was people there like, "No, check out," and they had a truck following behind us. They're just getting in the truck. People getting in the truck, and I was like, I am not doing this again. My motivation was, I'm going to do it once. I'm not doing this again. And we finally made it. We had our little turning blue ceremony, and I became an infantry soldier. But everybody here is going through some kind of storm. Everybody here. There is something in your life that is challenging you. Something in your life that you don't think that you can overcome. But that's not true. If you apply the biblical principles to any problem, you can overcome it. Where's Scott Bliss, man? Is he here today? Out of town, man. That's one guy, man. He's going through so many health issues. I just think about all he's been having strokes for over 20 years. Since he was 30 years old, a young man. And that dude, he just, his heart, you think about some of the things that that man, he knows how close life is to being over. He knows when he's having one. He's like, "Oh, well, hey, I think I'm about to have a stroke. Let's go to the hospital." He can forecast it. He's prepared for the storms, of those type of storms. Sure, we all have different challenges and different things, but we've got to really look at the storms that we're going through and really apply God's teaching to them to help us get through. With Christ, you have everything you need to handle whatever comes your way. Sometimes it takes a storm to bring these great capabilities to the surface. Amen? Point number 3, we got to focus on the storm walker and not the storm. Jesus was walking on water. We can focus on the wind and the rain and everything around us, but we need to focus on Jesus. Let's go back to Matthew 14.
Okay. Come on.
Matthew 14, verse 26.
Come on, Dave. Come on, Dave.
When the disciples saw him walking on the water, They were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you and walk on water." "Come," he said. And Peter got down out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink. And he cried out, "Lord, save me!" Immediately he reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" You look at this, man, and Jesus walking on water, they're terrified. One thing, fear and faith can't be in the same place at the same time. So if you're terrified, you're not full of faith, you're full of fear. These guys, they see somebody walking on the water and they're afraid. They don't even recognize Jesus. The reason why they didn't recognize Jesus is because they weren't looking for Jesus in the middle of the storm. Do you look for Jesus in the middle of your storms? Or do you look for somebody to blame? Is it somebody else's fault? It's his fault. It's her fault. It's my wife's fault. It's my daughter's fault. That's who it is. Do you look for somebody else to blame? But I like this right here but in the middle of the storm, Peter, once he's like, wait a minute, he starts to see Jesus. He says, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come." The word that he uses that says, it just translates, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come," is, "Lord, if this is you, my King, give me an executive order to walk on water." It's like, just command me to do it and I'm going to do it.
Wow.
It's not just, hey, if it's me, no, it's like, oh, I see you're the King. Command me to walk on water and I'll do it. Can you imagine? The wind and everything is still going. The waves and everything are still smashing. He fixes his eyes on Jesus.
Come on.
He gets out of the boat. He's like, oh man. He starts to walk. He starts going. And he's like, dang it. Wait a minute. Whoa. I ain't supposed to be able to walk on water. Hold me. Oh, Lord, save me. He forgets. He forgets. And he starts thinking, I'm not supposed to be able to do this. A lot of times we'll be doing great spiritually. We'll be doing some amazing things. We're spiritually walking on water. And then we remember, wait a minute. I'm a liar. I always struggle with lying. Why haven't I been lying? Wait a minute. Man, I need a drink. I need to go get drunk and get behind the wheel. That's what I used to do. We start thinking about the things that's going to keep us away from focusing on Jesus. We got to fix our eyes on Jesus and not let all the wind and the rain and what's going on around us and what this church believes and what that church believes and praying in your heart and all this stuff, all these false doctrines take us away. We got to remember and fix our eyes on Jesus' plan. But you look at this and there's a few things. Little faith is often found in places where you might expect great faith. Peter, he had little faith. He's out there, Jesus said, "Oh, you have little faith." And that man was just walking on water. That's a little faith. Little faith is too eager for signs, always fleecing something. Lord, if you want me to do this, if you want me to share my faith, send somebody right in front of me. Then someone will come right in front of you. Well, send somebody else to prove it. Looking for a sign, looking for another fleece. That's little faith. Little faith is too much affected by what everybody else is doing. Well, I mean, yeah, that scripture's good and all, but that was for back then. Now, if you look around, things have changed. No, things have changed now. We do things like this now. That scripture not anymore. It was for way back then. Yeah. My pastor taught me that once. No, the scriptures are true today just as they were true back then. But yet, he showed some strengths in little faith. Like I said, he actually walked on water. Little faith will have you out there walking on water. Little faith will have you obeying. He said, come. And he's like, all right, a little bit of faith, I'm going to go on the strength I have. Like Gideon. Like he told Gideon. Little faith is safe because Jesus is right there when you start to sink. Wow. But the one thing you can't forget is that when he started to sink, he said, Lord, save me. You can't forget who saved you in the first place. Don't get mad at him. Lord, why'd you do this to me? It's your fault, Lord. Don't get mad at the Lord. Learn what he's trying to teach you in the test. Little faith won't let you drown. It'll keep you spiritually afloat. We have to fix our eyes on Jesus. Let's go to Hebrews 12. Yeah, I was preparing this lesson, and my page fell out. But I got it. Don't worry. Hebrews 12. And in Hebrews 12, we're going to read in verse 1. It says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders us and the sin that so easily entangles us. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning and its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Fix our eyes on Jesus. We got to be focused on Jesus. What does it mean to fix your eyes on Jesus? Our quiet times, our reading the Bible, studying for ourselves, getting in depth with the scriptures. Let them move your heart. It's not a fairy tale. Don't read it like a fairy tale. Like, oh man, that was an awesome little story. Oh man, the moral of that one's awesome. Get advice. I might try that one time. Just really use the scriptures to change your heart. Surrender to what you have learned. There's a lot of things we learn in the Bible and we struggle with it. You may not want to do it, but we have to surrender to what we have learned in the Bible. Have you been studying the Bible for a while and haven't made the decision to become a true Christian, a true disciple? Is there something that you're struggling with? You're battling. The scriptures plainly says it, and you're battling with it. Let it be a storm of perfection to change your life. Don't let it turn into a storm of correction, because God will correct you over and over again until you learn the lesson that he's trying to teach you. Are your prayers, are they shallow, like the little ankle-deep prayers? Woo, kiddie pool. Or are they deep, heartfelt prayers? They've got to be heartfelt and deep. It's the time with you and God, when you get to talk to God, the most holy place. In the old days, the priest would be the only one that could actually go in there and talk to God one time a year. Now we have the opportunity to do it every time we want, anytime we want, because of Jesus. We need to have strong prayers. Fixing our eyes on Jesus is being with the fellowship, not missing meetings, being an active part of the fellowship, helping people become Christians, studying the Bible with other people. One thing that I hate to look at, I hate to miss, The one thing that Jesus was in the middle of a storm when he sent the disciples out to the storm. John the Baptist, his cousin, was just beheaded. And he stayed focused he was laser focused. All right, well, let me try to pull aside and let me go pull some time, get some solitary time. And everybody came and he was like, oh, amen. Let me heal him. Let me heal him. Let me heal him. Let me feed him. Let me feed him. And then after that, he went and had some solitary time where he went and prayed. We've got to make sure that we recognize that Jesus had storms in his life too. And then his storm ended on the cross. Let's pick it back up in verse 4 here. Now, I'm going to read from 4 to 11. Every time you see the word disciplined, there's another Greek word that's interchanged for that with a different meaning. And they translated it all as discipline, 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 discipline. But I'm going to read it a little bit differently. Read along with me, and you'll see where these words are injected. Hebrews 12, verse 4. In your struggle against sin, you have not resisted to the point of shedding your blood, and you have forgotten that the word of encouragement that addresses you as sons. My son, do not make light of the Lord's comforting, and do not lose heart when he educates and trains you, because the Lord coaches those he loves, and he flogs everyone he accepts as a son. Endure hardship as training. God is treating you as sons. For what son is not dealt with and disciplined by his father? If you're not coached, and everyone needs coaching, then you're illegitimate children and not true sons. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who have corrected us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to our Father and live? Our fathers disciplinary corrected us the way us for a little while as they thought best. But God disciplinary corrects us for our good, that we may share in his holiness. No disciplinary correction seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, this is the good part. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. We've got to make sure that these storms are training us. Instead of pointing fingers in the middle of a storm, let's say, what is God teaching me today? What can I learn from this situation? What did I do that I could do better next time? How can I react that won't, cause issues in this situation? We've got to look at ourselves and see how God is training us in the moment. In Hebrews 4, verse 14, it says, since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who has been tempted in all things as we are, but yet without sin. Therefore, let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, that we may receive the mercy and find grace to help us in time of need. So as we weather the storms, let's remember that Jesus, he is either correcting us or perfecting us. We just need to make sure we keep our eyes on Jesus, focus on the storm walker, and not the surrounding storms of life. And to God be the glory. Amen.